Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. Joining us this week is Jovonne Cameron, software engineer and React expert. Thank you for joining us this week.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. I'm really excited.
Oh, me too. I've been learning some React, and when the topic came out for this chat, it was really interesting to me. I'm a backend engineer, so to me, state is a
Mhm.
database. I just go to the database and
Yeah,
ask it questions, which is a completely so. The topic's going to be about state management for React. But first of all, can you give us a quick intro about yourself?
of course, of course. Okay, so again, my name is Jovonne Cameron. I'm a software engineer and I'm a technical writer. I pivoted into the industry roughly about 4 years ago. I was formerly a special education teacher and I used to work with kids on the spectrum. And one day I just made the decision and I became a software engineer within 6 months. And so I've been doing that since that time, and now I'm just extremely passionate about breaking down really complex topics for beginners and, helping startups to scale and speaking at tech conferences. I really love what I do, so I'm just really happy to be here.
That's the right way to approach the. I've been in the business for a while, and the best people are the ones who are truly passionate, because it can be brutal otherwise. Let's be honest. Like it can be just,
Yeah, yeah,
it's if you don't like it, sometimes it's just terrible. Well,
it
let's
is.
delve into some ideas we have here. So, first of all,
Yeah.
everybody was tried doing some React, especially coming from the outside, like myself, has
Hmm.
hit the wall of state management. I
Hmm.
can guarantee that. Is this not even just something I made up or something I'm coming up for the sake of the interview? Literally, that's my problem. Like getting to understand how to manage the state of what you're doing is the most complicated thing in React, in my
Yeah,
opinion. That's
it is.
I think it is the only issue I really had while learning React.
Mhm.
So first of all, maybe you can start with what state management exactly is and why is it so critical for React apps?
Yeah, so that's a really good question because state management goes with how we manage our data in our apps across different components. So React uses components to kind of compartmentalize different parts of your web app. And state describes like the current condition of your app. And then the state management go is talking about how we store it, how we update it, how we reflect changes in the UI.
Okay,
So
yeah. So yeah, that's a good way. So that's to give a practical example. If we were building something like myself, so let's I would like to let's do this. Let's keep a common theme for let's keep a hypothetical application in mind. An hypothetical
yeah.
application in mind, which is close to single wire to what we do telephony and stuff. Let's say we're building a call center agent interface. So
Mm.
I'm on a screen, I'm logged into my phone, and when a call comes in, I have to show a screen that shows that Luca is calling and they are already a customer and they purchased 3 items last month. Or Jovonne is calling and she's a VIP customer because she bought more than $200 of merchandise in the last week or whatever, something like
Yeah.
that. And you go through that and you can put in notes. And then when you're done with the call, you hit next, that saves and you
Mm.
go to the next call. So let's work through this. State management will be anywhere from knowing which screen you're on, right? So navigation
Yeah. Hmm.
to the data. So Lucas data, Javon's data, someone else's data, whatever.
Yeah.
And why? So what are the common issues to run into? I know we've run into a few, but maybe
Hmm.
make me feel better by saying the ones I ran into, please.
Oh yeah. I think a lot of the issues that we can common that would be kind of common is your user interface not updating as your state is changing in the background. So that could be like someone getting like maybe ghost notifications. So based on our example that we just used, so that would be like a call might be coming in and it's just you get like ghost notifications, but the call has already ended or something like that.
Oh yeah.
So just not keeping up with I think that's one of the most common ones. And then also app performance, especially like with loading times. That's a pretty big one in state management. Yeah, those two I think are the pretty most common ones.
Okay, so
Mhm.
I'm in the clear. Yeah, especially when you're running with async stuff like telephony. That's exactly what keeps happening
Yeah,
to me when I'm dabbling in React UIs. Call is coming in, but it's nothing's happening on the screen, or the call's already done
right.
and it's not clearing up, or that kind of work. And I assume
Yeah.
that kind of issue can lead it to even cost issues and outages. So,
Oh yeah.
what are the worst examples you have of poor state management?
Oh yeah. I think one of the things that can directly be affected by state management is the user experience. And so, once user experience goes down, it can definitely um, create some like unwanted costs for the actual app. So I'll give you an example. I just gave a talk at React Miami a couple of weeks ago where I had made a pretty big mistake, a $50,000 mistake, to be exact. And basically, if we're looking technically under the hood, there was a lot of little things that needed to be refactored, but the overarching problem was excessive API calls. And so,
Yeah.
as the traffic spiked on the site, so more people using the site, things getting the traffic getting heavier, it like ballooned our cloud costs. So we got like a $50,000 bill.
Wow.
And then it was pretty interesting. But on the other hand, that 50K was just for the bill that we got, the cloud bill. That didn't include probably lost sales
Yeah.
that we got from horrible user experience or maybe outdated inventory or people overbuying or underbuying because our in the back end based on like our databases, they think we have
Yeah.
different numbers than are being updated in our app. So those are some of the very tragic things that can happen with global state. So it's with state in general. So yeah,
Yeah. It feels like it's not easy to balance how much you keep in the application as opposed to
Mhm.
what you keep on the server, and
Yeah,
you update, so you do the right amount of API calls, because you cannot can't just keep everything on the client, because then
yeah,
things like shopping cannot be done only on the client, because at some point the server has to know what you paid for, or you could just order
yeah.
whatever you want. So it's
Exactly. Now
and
everybody's, leaving with free stuff.
yeah, that would be fun to have, but not for not if you're the
Not for
programmer
us.
that made the application. So I wonder if there is. So again, my let's start from my experience. I tried using Redux, and it was
Mhm.
I'll be honest. I have 20 and change, probably going on 30 at this point. Experience years of experience in backend development. Like I've been
Oh,
at it
great.
for a long time, and I couldn't get Redux to work.
Hmm.
It was that bad. Like as soon as I started with Redux, I had 20 files to work with, boilerplate everywhere. Anything if you follow the tutorials, it's just worse than you just try and do it yourself using some
Exactly.
simple general state management. So
Mm.
I really want to ask you not only what are the best practices, but how do I start doing state management in a sustainable way when I'm just starting out React?
Oh, yes, that's a great question. And I feel your pain on the Redux. Redux is a pain point for a lot of people. A lot of people also always come up to me and they're like, I have to get Redux out of my app and XYZ. So I understand, especially the point with the boilerplate. The weeds can grow pretty quickly. But I feel like some of the best practices and maybe some core principles would be like having like a single source of truth and like making sure you centralize like critical state to ensure consistency across the app. So, like for example, you're using Redux. I find personally that a lot of apps may use Redux before its time because Redux is kind of like a monster, and personally, I think it's meant for a lot bigger, more complex apps. Um, so I wouldn't introduce it too early. But
Yeah, feels like
other
that's a great detour to take, too. If you let me ask this question, I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
when do you think Redux should come into the picture, and what are you using before? Because that might be my error.
Oh.
Like you read blog posts, and the blog post is saying, "Yeah, just install this, do that," and then you're lost completely. So what's it? I don't.
Mhm.
I'm not asking for line of code or something, but what's the feeling you need to have about your application before you bring in the more complicated tools?
Oh, that's great. I think when when your company starts to have the conversations about scaling and increasing,
Mm,
the amount of uh the amount of like active users, or if you have an idea that that you plan on bringing on a feature that would increase those users, I think that's when we can start talking about it. Because it's all about, I feel like I'm not an expert in Redux, but from what I'm gathering, right, I think it's more for managing really complex application states. So if you're doing, I'm over exaggerating here, but if you have a task app, I wouldn't use Redux for a task app, right? I would probably just stick to something a lot smaller. But if we're talking about enterprise level,
yeah.
we might want to consider, okay, you know what? We started as a startup, now we're considering enterprise. I also like to gauge it with how we're scaling other platforms that we're using.
Mhm.
So if we decide to take on the enterprise level of many different platforms that we're using, okay, so let's make sure that our state can handle everything that we're preparing for, and kind of make sure you have that conversation with your team about whatever you plan on transitioning into, which could be like from whatever to Redux. So that's when I think
I think
this
I
should
really
probably
like
occur.
the you said something that really strikes me as very, very important.
Mm,
Scaling or making changes based on revenue, based on how the direction
yeah,
you're taking, not solely for the sake of doing things. While a
yeah.
lot of engineering paths and startups
Mm,
are have been done just for the sake of it. Like I've seen people redo an entire AI engine internally just because the new version of they switched from from OpenAI or Gemini or vice versa. I don't remember exactly, but one
yeah,
of them was just had a new tool, so they redid the entire thing just for the sake of doing it. I think what you
yeah.
said is perfect. Do it when it starts creaking. I don't want to the term,
Yeah,
but it's
like that's one of my things too with state management. I have like, so I have this thing called like the 3-2-1 state management rule, where it's three questions, two strategies, and one golden rule. And so the questions are very simple, how is the state getting used? Who's gonna need access to certain types of state? And then also how often am I updating this state? So those types of questions kind of help me decide where do I want to go when it comes to state. Do I need do it? Does it have to be global? Should this be local? Is this server side? How do you want to go about it? And then I have two methods, and then my two methods is to monitor. So monitoring anything that goes on the server side, monitoring your state management in general, especially global state, because it can get really sticky if you decide to make your app very global state heavy. And then my one golden rule is to simplify. So it's very easy for excuse me, state to get kind of sticky very quickly, especially when you already have this idea in your mind and you're like, it's going to be the next Facebook. And so now you have all these overcomplicated tools and all these platforms, and you're overwhelming your team with tool fatigue, because nobody really knows how to go about certain things, or even worse, you haven't been documenting all of these platforms that you're onboarding, and so it just makes it a complete mess for like debugging and overall developer experience. So simplifying is a big thing for me. Like that
yeah.
is what I go in first with when it comes to state management.
So, given that the JavaScript community, React community, the open source communities in general are very opinionated, my next question is going to make you some enemies, but we can live with that.
I don't know.
What,
Okay.
which library should I use instead of Redux to get started? Zustand, something else?
Ooh, that is gonna make some enemies. I'll be honest, I don't have a particular favorite, but depending on the size of your app, I like to stick to Zustand, and I also really like, it's escaping my mind now, another platform that I really like. Oh, React Query, which is now called TanStack Query.
Yeah, it says
Um,
it changed name.
yeah, it changed, but now it's TanStack Query, but I still call it React Query. But those two are pretty much my choices in terms of like different platforms to use or libraries to use. I don't have like a long list that I
No, it's
like that's like a preference. Yeah.
me neither. As I'm a Ruby expert, I'm a Rails expert. I
Okay.
contribute to the core and whatnot. So we all have our picks, but it's better to have a list of one or two. But Zustand sounds like so for our single page app that we imagined earlier, that's just an interface
Mhm,
that either has two main states. One, either you are on a call or you're not on a
mhm.
call. If you're on a call, you see a form with the data of the person and you can take notes. If you're not on a call, it's just a phone ringing, waiting for the next call to happen. Zustand will be more than enough for that.
Yeah, I think so. Zustand, even context API, um, might benefit from like smaller pieces. If you're using like simpler use cases or smaller pieces of state, you can use context API. I don't know how many enemies I'm gonna make with that, but
No, you're not going to make many, but
Mhm,
JavaScript is one thing I found is JavaScript in general
mhm.
is very very opinionated. Like you can
Yeah,
get into fights on Discord with people for without knowing.
yeah.
Like it's incredible.
Not even just Discord, Reddit. Have you seen the Reddit threads?
Yeah.
They're intense. They're really intense over there. They have very strict ways of how they like to go about things. And I also do think your experience plays a huge role in your choice because
Hmm.
there are some people like yourself who have been in the game for so long, you know, you've seen it all, as opposed to myself who's a little bit newer in the game, and I'm okay with tinkering with all of the new shiny tools um that come out there. So I'm just like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna make any enemies, but I do like to use the brand new shiny tools as opposed to somebody who's a little bit more experienced that would probably use something that's been around for a while. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's uh what works for me in general when doing front
Mhm.
end and my limited React learning journey. Although I need to brush up on that because I have a couple things I need to do. But
Yep.
that's an aside.
Mhm.
Is I tend to see everything with the eye of a backend developer. So a lot of it is thinking in terms of databases, and I'm probably always falling into the camp of too many API calls because
Yeah.
everything is on my server. And I just, you know what? I'm just gonna store it there when I know it's safe.
Yeah. Yeah,
it is.
exactly.
It's a behavior which probably leads us into a next block of interesting discussion, which I really need to ask you about. Another thing I
Mhm,
never told. So I am a test-driven development by trade. I've
mhm,
done it for such a long time. I even authored a couple extensions to Cucumber. We did a lot of that in Ruby, but
mhm.
getting the same thing going in React was very very hard to me, especially when components are heavy on state and you need to pre-populate them
Mm,
before they work.
yeah.
So how do you test a state heavy application?
Um, so with state heavy applications, normally I think my immediate go-to is like unit testing. So writing tests that kind of simulate state changes and assert the UI or business logic, making sure that the business logic responds correctly. Another thing I kind of do is also with mocking. I love using mocking libraries.
Hmm.
Because I want to know, I like to like simulate the state behavior or like the external data sources. These are things that at the time that I made that mistake that I was telling you before, I didn't really know much about them. So unit testing is big for me, mocking is big for me, and also integration testing is what I love doing, especially if I have to work
Hmm.
with multiple multiple components when the state needs to flow specifically through a system. Like integration testing is kind of the way I would go for that. But otherwise, unit testing and mocking. That's kind of like how I go
Yeah,
about
I
it.
think
My first thing.
there's a that's a similar strategy as you do in server side apps like Rails. That's very similar to my. So I probably need to try and apply the same approach.
Yeah,
Unit is the bulk of it because unit tests usually prevents actual bugs because then
yeah,
things don't work. While
mhm,
integration is more from preventing yourself from breaking something you already built, in my opinion. Like
yeah,
integration is how you make sure it still works, which is important too, but
exactly.
it's a different level. And
Hmm.
the other big thing was to me was observability. The dev tools in the browser, there's a Chrome extension, were
Hmm.
sort of useful, but what's the right way to prevent issues with state using observability? Like, what should I watch for? Too much data, slow updates? What are you looking for?
Mm. Let me think. So wait, can you ask me the question
When you're
again?
using,
Mhm.
so we're using observability tools to
Mhm.
prevent issues with state, what are you looking for? What are the worst issues for what are worst issues for that you can prevent using observability? Are you looking for storing too much? Is it even something as storing too much data in your state? Probably yes.
Yeah, I would say I would look for probably like I would that's a very good question because I haven't had to work with observability tools in a while, but I know that alerting and monitoring is a big thing, like how I said in my 3-2-1 state rule. Um, so kind of like triggering notifications so that for the alerting, right? If I'm doing alerting, triggering notifications, so like unexpected state changes that occur have like thresholds. So if they're exceeded, I can know. Monitoring, just constantly tracking state metrics, error rates, performance to what you just said. Like you want to make sure that performance is doing well. So monitoring can help with that. And there's so many different platforms out there that can help you do that. So you don't even have to do that in-house anymore. Whereas opposed to before, I was doing it a lot in-house before.
Yeah, it is. Well, this leads us into another interesting topic, which is performance, right? So the
Mhm.
storing too much data, too many API calls, too many whatever. So, what are the main performance killers? Because, in my opinion, and you said it earlier, but I want to reiterate that the user experience is paramount here. Because
Mhm.
otherwise, you're better off just doing the classic post a form to a server, render
Yeah.
HTML, show that on the screen. That will always work. And it was middle ground that always works. But if you're going for React, you want it to be quick and fast and good.
Yeah.
So, what are the main performance killers, and what are the best strategies to get performance out of React?
Oh yeah. Um, One of the things that can help maintain the performance would be like I like lazy loading. So like
Mm,
loading the state only when I need it. There's a lot of performance bottlenecks that can happen. Um, and also I'm trying to think off the rip here. Keeping the state
mhm.
minimal, probably.
Okay.
Only storing what you need at the time, and then not overloading your state with like derived values. So maybe like to our example that we said before, if I'm purchasing merchandise and stuff, I'm not using state to store like a cart total or something like that.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm just gonna just derive it as it happens instead of trying to store that state.
Yeah. Sometimes I want to add one other thing, which is
Mhm.
silly to say, but I've seen it happen. So, calculations. Because
Yeah.
a lot of times you're better off getting your calculations from the back end. So this is a real life scenario. We
Mhm.
built an interface for a customer who has millions and millions of calls
Mhm.
that already happened. So it's a call log, so phone calls for a call center, and all of
Mhm.
those have a duration, and the duration was somehow expressed. It was expressed in milliseconds, whatever seconds, and they wanted to display the classic, 1 minute 45 seconds, but with the that single piece was completely killing a React application. It
Mhm.
was somehow probably done wrong on our side, on my side, most likely.
Yeah.
But instead of clearing the state, when you will paginate back and forth, so page one, you have 20 calls. You go to page two, you have 20 plus 20, it's now it's 40. It was recalculating the display value. So if it's
Okay.
120 seconds, we're calculating to 2 minutes for all calls. So
Mhm.
if you paginated forward a while or you did a search, suddenly you have a
Okay.
few thousand calls, and for every call, every time you move forward, everything gets recalculated. That was a killer. I don't know if in
Oh.
general the browser performance probably not great, or doing it with state
Mhm.
was not the right approach, but
Mhm.
calculations were terrible in my opinion. So numbers are better left to servers.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point, and I don't think a lot of people take that into account when making certain decisions, especially regarding pagination as well. I think one that I'm I do think one that I didn't mention before. I don't know if I said it before. Unnecessary re-renders. So like the
No, you
component
didn't.
constantly. Yeah. Okay. So like that's one of the performance killers. It happens pretty often, but re-rendering the
What
components that
triggers?
don't
What
need
triggers?
to.
I'm really interested. I don't know what that exactly is. So, what triggers unnecessary renders? Why? When do they
It
happen?
Yeah, often caused by like prop or state changes that aren't really relevant. So you
Hmm.
have something, if you have something that is maybe like a notification that comes in, your whole app shouldn't be re-rendering because that one specific prop changed or that one
Hmm.
specific state changed, and it's not necessarily relevant to your notifications component, let's say. So I think that that happens a lot when people kind of overuse global state.
Hmm.
So that's also another problem that people sometimes do. See, that might make some enemies.
Yeah.
That might make
Yeah.
some enemies when you me talking about overusing global state because people really rely on storing too much data in global state and it can cause the widespread re-renders when only a
Oh, I see.
small piece of
When
data
you change
changes.
global state, everything renders. So if you store
Yeah,
too much in global state, then what you get is every time you change. And if I get it right, something like a big screen where you have your top 100 customers and there's a
yeah,
report where there's spend, there's a couple graphs. So it's already doing some work behind the scenes.
mhm.
And you have a classic top right icon with the little red badge for the new
Yes,
notification. If you store those notifications in the same state as the data that you're using for the page, just getting a
yes,
notification makes the entire thing get recalculated.
exactly.
Oh yeah, that's
And that could
that
that could be a pain.
yeah, I can that's something that I'm really learning here. So I think we
I'm glad. I'm
I'm
glad.
it's I'm sure it's going to be useful for other people, but
Mhm.
there's a lot just as an aside before we go towards a couple other questions I have. as a
Yeah, yeah.
backend as a backend engineer, so again, I come from the world of building Linux servers from scratch,
Okay.
actually writing the software it goes on them and running it all through a black terminal, and we never speak to anyone. We
Yeah.
don't have friends. We don't have friends. We usually don't have windows. We don't like those.
Oh my
But
goodness.
in general, going to the world of front end development is not only a journey when it comes to actually learning the UI and UX portion,
Mhm.
which is in itself a problem, but
Yeah.
it has a whole set of engineering problems that are not truly understood by
Yeah.
people who are used to just writing, Golang code for writing tools that maybe run a few thousand phone calls a minute. Doesn't matter, but
Hmm.
it's not the same thing. Like, and simple things like this global state you just said are the classic gotcha that will get someone like me.
Hmm.
Because my
Yeah.
brain says, well, there's one global state. Why do we need to do local? Now you know.
Yeah, now you know. They do have, so there's it that's the thing about state, right? Like everybody views it kind of differently. Some people will feel like certain states need to be local and only to a certain component until you start introducing other components that will now need that. So now you have to make a decision. Okay, this started in local state. Now it's looking like it needs to be upgraded to global state, or like, do I want to use context API? Or so there's so many different decisions that kind of need to be made as your app is scaling, like what we were talking about before. And I find where a lot of companies kind of go wrong is that they don't have kind of a process that they're creating while they're building their apps to say, like, okay, this is how we're going to make these decisions in the future when that time comes. Because the goal of the company is for it to grow, right? So it's always great to
Mhm.
keep it in mind, but you don't need to start an app with Redux. Like that's too big. You might want to start smaller and you say, okay, in the future we'll look forward to, integrating Redux or whatever other tool you guys are looking for. So documentation is a really big thing that I feel like a lot of folks aren't really paying attention to. And that would help for someone like yourself who is on the back end, but you need to know something about some like global state or local state or something that should be documented, how we go about it on the front end so you're not completely lost.
So now we draw to a close, but first I have the obligatory question everybody gets these days
Okay.
when they're on the podcast, which is
Yeah.
AI. How is AI affecting your field of work and in particular state management? I don't think if anything's particular is changing there, but you see AI having any effect of what's going on? Are people just writing Ror's code like in other fields, or is it?
You know, that's a good question. I think for specifically for state management, I think I don't see a huge effect yet, but I have some theories in my mind
Oh,
evolving
that
about,
I'm curious about that.
yeah, yeah. So I'm thinking like maybe I'm assuming that someone is going to start with probably like edge computing or serverless
Mhm.
architecture. So like stateless functions are usually the norm, but like a lot of apps need state. And we'll lean, I think like we'll eventually lean heavily on like event-driven architecture using queues, data streams, maybe durable state to coordinate things. And I think also we're going to lean a little bit more into personalization. So state is getting to be increasingly user specific. So back to our example before about your account and my account,
Mhm.
in real time, it's kind of like GPT powered apps where users
Mhm.
are uh, inferred and stored in real time, and this demand will like help with responsive state and think like I'm thinking
That
like
will be, yeah. I
client
think we're
cache or
not
temporary memory.
we're not that far, there's finally we're starting to see, so like the latest Gemma models from Google are
Hmm.
actually small enough, especially the super small ones, are actually
Hmm.
small enough to do little computations directly in the
Yeah.
browser, stuff
Hmm.
like recomputing state and whatever. So you might be onto something here. It is
That's what I kind of like predict. I don't know. It could be out already, but that's what I'm seeing so
no,
far. A
it
lot of
might
people.
take, in my opinion, it's going to take a while. Like my
Okay.
take on AI is, I mean, I build AI applications. We have a
Hmm.
very good AI product that's gaining a lot of traction because it's done well, but it's
Hmm.
done well precisely because we set a perimeter and said, we're going to solve this problem. Everything else that's outside of the problem is another project or someone else's problem or
Yeah.
whatever. And if you find yourself a precise target, then AI can be very effective right now. If
Yeah.
you set out
I
building
agree.
a replacement to a lawyer, a replacement to a doctor, a replacement to an engineer,
Hmm.
it's not going to work right now. I don't know if
No,
it's going to be in the future. I
I
don't
don't
have.
think so.
I hope I knew, if I knew, would be rich, as I always say. But right now, it's not there. Yeah, definitely is.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not there at the moment. I think a lot of people feel like it's going to get there, but that could be due to like lack of being in the field or lack of education. But at most, we're going to have people, monitoring AI more
Yeah.
than anything else. But yeah,
And I think the problem right now is not even the quality of the models, but it's the cost. Like the powerful models are so expensive and so slow that you cannot if the model stay the same but the cost goes down
mhm,
tenfold, then we
yeah,
have something. So that's probably where Google, in my opinion, is winning out. Google has their own hardware and their models are
mhm,
focused on costing less money and being faster while not being particularly great. Nobody needs AI to pass a PhD exam right now.
yeah,
This
yeah.
I don't need it to do that. It's outside of what I need AI for. And
Hmm.
I think that they're on to something. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, that was great. I learned so much that I need to go brush up and maybe pick up my old calling screen application and finish it. But before we go, any conferences you'll be speaking at soon, or just attending, or any events you recommend attending over the year, even
Yeah.
in the future?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple. It depends on your if you're a beginner or mid-level or
Mhm.
higher up. But for beginners, I would say more so like Grace Hopper Conference, probably Render ATL is another React one. And then you also have for like more senior, Squiggle Conf is coming up. There's a couple, of course, ClueCon. And then those are the ones that mainly I think I'm gonna head to. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Then, well, see you there. I'll be.
You'll be there
I'll
too?
be.
Okay, perfect.
I'll be at ClueCon. I'll be going to a few more conferences than usual this year.
Mhm.
I've been skipping out a lot, and I need to get myself back into that because it's very
Yeah.
very. It's a great experience every time. Just meeting either you're meeting people you know, which is
Mhm.
always great.
Mhm.
It's a fun thing now because everybody we're so distributed. Like the open source community, I made so many friends over the course of the years, and many of
Yeah.
them only met like twice or once or even
Mhm.
never. So just a chance to meet someone in person is amazing.
It's a good idea. Yeah, I love going to different conferences and meeting other developers because kind of like how we're talking here today, I end up learning a lot too. I get taught a lot of things at conferences personally. But other than ClueCon, do you have any on your mind that you're thinking of going to?
We're finalizing a couple. I'm going to Camellia World in Germany, and which is going to
Oh, okay.
be 2 weeks from now. I'll
Mhm.
be at ClueCon, and we're trying to figure out who's going to MWC in Vegas in autumn because
Okay.
everybody wants to
Okay.
go. So everybody wants to go. So we'll have to do a drawing or whatever.
To keep it fair, to keep it fair. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be. But there's a couple others. Well,
Oh, that's
thank you so
awesome.
much for joining us. It was a great chat,
Of
and I learned so
course.
much, and I'm sure it's gonna be useful for everybody.
Yes, thank you so much.
So today, Jovonne Cameron joined us, software engineer, technical writer, React expert. We spoke a lot about state management in React. I learned I need to go back and redo my application using something else that's not Redux. And well, thank you so much for joining us today again. And for the rest of the people, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.